So after reading the new Atlantis, I do think it's apparent that the story does take place in the future, but it's also very realistic in the way it handles that, even though it's a dystopian type story. Because I think it talks about things that are relevant to today that we're dealing with, the environmental issues that we're facing, that we were facing when this was written back in the 1970s. So I think that's how it makes it realistic, dealing with those environmental issues, and kind of broadens on that, saying in the future this is what we could be facing, the different things like that the book explains, because it takes place in America, like how it talks about how Florida, at the end of the story, how Florida gets separated from the United States because of all the environmental issues. The water is rising and things like that. So I think it makes it realistic to the reader in that way. I found it interesting in the story how they separated the actual narrative with the other narrative in the italicized portions. And I wasn't sure what it meant. I found the italicized portions very interesting, and I wasn't sure really what they meant. But going back, I do think that maybe they're like dreams. I think that they could be dreams of the main character, Belle, that she's having her worries like for the future, and wondering like what's going to happen if they continue at this rate, the way the world is heading towards, kind of like the environmental issues they're facing and everything. So I think that maybe they're dreams of hers, and I also think maybe they could be partially true, in the sense that it seems like they are like heading towards that path like that. And I found it interesting, one thing about this that I found, a quote from the story that I really liked, was it is enough to make you understand why most languages have a word like soul. There are various degrees of death, and time spares us none of them, yet something endures for which a word is needed. I found this interesting, and I think it really relates to the story in the way that this is like from the main character talking, and I think it's just like expressing her worry like for the world. Like I think like she thinks they're heading down a wrong path, and the way the world is working, because we kind of see how it's different from our world in the way that marriage is illegal in this world, which, and adultery is what's okay. So she's just kind of saying like how like things have changed in the world she lives in from then, and how there are like remnants of it, and like I found that interesting, like how that quote relates to the story. So I thought that was really interesting, and overall I really enjoyed the story, and I thought the writing was just really good, and it was well done. Ursula K. Le Guin, I've never read anything by her, but I thought it was really well done, and she's obviously a really great writer. But I would say like one question I have about it, I think the story left me with a lot of questions. I don't think it answers everything, but I would just say what like how you think like our like modern world, like how like it's interesting because the story takes place in the future, but it was written in the 1970s, but kind of the issues that they talk about in it, it's almost like in current times it relates. So I'm wondering like what you guys thought of that, how even though it was written in the 70s, the issues that they're facing are still relevant for today, even though the story is supposed to take place in the future, and it's dystopian and obviously fictional, but still kind of realistic in a way.